My name's Andrew Webb, one of the co-organisers of this weekend. So I'd like to welcome you to this opening session on human being human. This year is Malvern Science and Faith Weekend, in which we explore what it means to be human from several different perspectives. Can we be understood purely in biological terms? Does a Darwinian perspective provide all the answers for human behaviour? Can it explain our humanity? Are we more than our brains? Are we more than matter? What is the role of science in the quest for human enhancement? These and other questions will be explored by a distinguished set of speakers in sessions taking place throughout the weekend. But we invite you to take part, engage in the debate, challenge the speakers. The sessions take a variety of formats. There's a workshop tomorrow morning on the beginnings and endings of life, a question time at the end of the evolving consciousness sessions, as well as more formal presentations. But all these give you the opportunity to take part. There's also a science event taking place as part of the programme with John Wood and Kinetic. But we begin this evening with human being, the evolving animal. And I'm pleased to welcome Eric Olson as our opening speaker. Eric is Professor of Philosophy at the University of Sheffield, specialising in metaphysics and the philosophy of mind. And his title is very appropriate for this session, and it is, What is a Human Being? Eric Olson.
Thanks very much. Let me see if I can get this to work. Yes, good. Okay, so the theme of the weekend is what it means to be human, and this is such a large and nebulous question, and not really one that I feel competent to try and answer or speak to. But Andrew glossed this question very helpfully as, what does it mean to be a person? And this is a question I feel like I can at least begin to say something about. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, if you ask a philosopher a question, what you usually get is a request for clarification. Right? So my question is, what does the question mean? All right? What is it? And there are, perhaps unsurprisingly, more than one thing that it might mean. It might mean, what is it to be a person as opposed to a non-person? What makes people special as such, right? So here's a person, and here's a non-person, all right? So you might ask, I take it this is an uncontroversial statement, right? Person, non-person, I hope, okay? So you might ask, what is it that my brilliant colleague Jenny saw on the left? Yes, on the what is it that she's got that makes her a person? And what is it that this cute but rather dim-witted border terrier on the right has not got that makes it not a person? Okay? Is that a clear question? Reasonably? Good. All right. Now, the answer to the question seems to be something like this, right? Roughly speaking, to be a person, as opposed to a non-person, is to have certain special mental qualities. Right? Intelligence, for example. That's what Jenny's got and what the dog hasn't got, only in a very small, very low degree, okay? Some sort of consciousness, and what's more, some sort of self-consciousness, right? So she can think about herself as opposed to other things and how she fits into the world, right? Certain abilities to think and reason about not just what's ready to hand, but also about states of affairs that are quite far removed from what's at hand. Not just removed in time and space, but also things that aren't actually the case. So, for example, my colleague Jenny can think not just about what it was like in Australia in the 19th century, but she can think about what it would have been like in Australia in the 19th century if, say, the Europeans had never discovered the place. Okay, and this is something that a non-person cannot do. So it's some constellation of qualities like these are what it is that makes something a person as opposed to a non-person. Okay? Now, I haven't tried to draw a precise list of what these qualities are. I don't find that a very interesting question, actually. I think whatever the list is exactly, it will be fairly clear that nearly all adult human beings are people, and no other animals that we know of are people. Okay, but there could be non-human people. There could be, for example, intelligent and rational space aliens. Okay, some people believe that there actually are non-human people, for example, gods and angels and spirits and demons and things like that. But these are all controversial. And I'm not a theologian. I'm not a science fiction author. I'm not going to talk about gods or angels or intelligent aliens. I want to talk about human people. I want to talk about us. All right. So now there's a second question that we can ask. This is the first one. What is it to be a person as opposed to a non-person? Answer, well, a person is a being with certain special mental qualities and capacities, all right? Now, there's a second and different question that we could ask, namely, what sort of thing is it that has these special mental qualities? Right? What sort of thing is a human person? And here's an analogy to help us think about the difference between these two questions. Suppose I ask, in my naive way, what is a star? Now, there are two things that I might mean. I might mean, well, what do you mean by a star? Okay, and the answer is fairly simple, right? A star is a luminous object visible in the nighttime sky, roughly. Okay, never mind the planets and the moon and the aeroplanes and so on. That's too complicated. Okay, so a star is a luminous object visible in the nighttime sky. What we mean by star. But there's also a second question we could ask, namely, what sort of thing is a star? Okay, so the ancient Greeks, they knew what a star was. They knew that stars were luminous objects visible in the nighttime sky, okay, but they did not know the nature of stars. They did not know what these stars were, all right? They thought they knew. They thought, naturally enough, that the stars were fires of some sort and that they emitted light by combustion, like the fire in the hearth, right? That was the only source of light that they knew about, okay? But they were wrong, okay? We know that stars are giant balls of gas, superheated gas, and that they emit light by nuclear fusion. Okay. So my question is, what sort of thing is a person? And that's analogous to the question, what sort of thing is a star? So I'm going to ask, what is it that stands to the special mental qualities that Jenny has and the dog hasn't got as being a superheated ball of gas stands to the property of being a luminous object visible in the nighttime sky. Okay, so I want to ask about our nature, just as you might ask about the nature of the stars. Let's see. All right. Now, you might think that just as modern science has taught us the nature of the stars, it has also taught us the nature of us, of human people. Long ago, people used to have the wrong idea about what a person was. Certain ancient Greeks, such as this one, Plato, thought that a person was a non-physical and immaterial and invisible being. Okay, a soul, you might say, okay, or at least something that had a soul as a part. Okay, and he thought that it was only this immaterial soul that enabled something to think and to be conscious. Okay, so on Plato's view, a thinking, conscious, intelligent being had to be a simple, immaterial, non-physical thing, invisible thing. Okay, unfortunately, I haven't got a nice illustration of an immaterial, non-physical thing. That's one of the limitations of the pictorial medium. But so you'll have to try to imagine it. Okay, so each of us is a soul, effectively, an immaterial thing. And as you probably all know, science has more or less proved that Plato was wrong about this. If thinking took place in an immaterial soul, then what would the brain be for? Suppose if thinking took place, that's not what I wanted, that's what I wanted, right. If thinking took place in an immaterial soul, then changes to the brain ought to have little, if any, effect on the operations of the soul. Certainly the soul would be able to continue thinking and to be conscious no matter what happened to the brain. Okay, but we know, of course, thanks in part to modern science, that even very small changes to the brain have dramatic effects on thought and consciousness. Okay, even it doesn't take very much to make you completely unconscious. That's how general anesthesia works. Okay, a knock on the head does it in a less gentle way. So we know that general anesthesia doesn't just prevent you from using your sense organs, right? When they put you under, it's not just that everything goes black and you can't hear anything and you can't see anything and you can't move and you can't feel anything. It's not like that, right? You simply lose consciousness completely. The mind, the mental activities just shut down. Okay. How could that be if those mental activities went on not in the brain but in this immaterial, non-physical soul? That's very mysterious. And we also know more generally that small differences in the brain are correlated with quite dramatic differences in things like intelligence, alertness, mood, memory, recognitional abilities, sense of humor, and many other mental properties. Okay? Even if the connections between what happens in the brain and what happens in the mind are still very much unknown and mysterious, there still are a lot of connections. Okay, so facts like these suggest that mental goings-on are physical processes in the brain, roughly speaking, and not non-physical processes in an immaterial soul. Okay, and because of this, the overwhelming majority nowadays of philosophers and scientists are convinced that there aren't any souls. So Plato, clever though he was simply mistaken about this. All right, so that's the ancient view akin to the view that the stars were fires. So what is the modern scientific view about what a human person is? That's actually not so simple. You might think the answer is this, that science has established that a person is a biological organism, a sort of an animal. So we are animals. It's not just that your body is an animal, but you yourself are an animal. You are a physical object of great complexity. Now, this can sound really very obvious, even uninteresting, sort of trivial. You might say, when's he going to say something I didn't already know? You might even think, we don't need science to tell us that we're animals. You can see that just by looking in the mirror and comparing yourself with the orangutan or the dog. It's clear that there's an animal there. And I think it's true that we are animals, but I don't think it's obviously true, nor is it obvious, nor do I think, is it the case that science establishes that we are animals. In fact, the view is very controversial. Large numbers of very clever people, including probably the majority of professional philosophers, think that we're not animals, or at least they say things, believe things that rule out our being animals. So why is that? What are the objections to? Why suppose that we're not animals? So I want to discuss, talk about two reasons you might think that we're not animals at all, actually. One is, that's not what I wanted. Oh, here we go. That is, okay. Yes. So I've already said that. So here's the, here we go. Here we go. This is the, you might call it the religious objection to the claim that we are animals. Okay, so suppose, for the sake of argument, this is a thought experiment, right? So suppose that you were to die and that your remains were to be cremated. Okay, I won't show you a picture of that. You can imagine it. All right, now in that case, the biological organism, the animal, is destroyed, right? It's made of atoms, and the fire simply disperses those atoms quite thoroughly to the four winds. Okay, it's rather like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. Okay, it's just gone. It no longer exists when that happens. Okay, and you might ask, well, could we bring that sandcastle back to life, so to speak? Could we rebuild it? Well, of course, we can make a very similar, even an exactly similar sandcastle if we were ingenious enough. If we had enough power, we could even hunt down and gather up the very grains of sand that made up the sandcastle and arrange them just as they were when the sandcastle stood, before the tide came in. Okay, that's possible. Okay, rather pointless task, but you could do it. But that wouldn't restore that very sandcastle to being. That would just be a new sandcastle, just like the old one, right? It would be a sort of replica. Okay, and the same thing seems to go for an animal. Once an animal has died and its atoms have been dispersed, nothing can bring it back into existence, right? Of course, we could create it, well, not we can't, but a being of sufficient power could do it. Like God, for example, could do it, right? He could gather up atoms and arrange them just as yours were arranged while you were alive, resulting in a living human person, okay? But it wouldn't be you, it seems. It would just be a sort of replica of you. All right. Okay, so if we are organisms, it looks as if life after death is impossible for us, or at least it's not clear how it could be possible. All right, but some people think that we do have life after death, or at least that we could have it. And if that's the case, then we couldn't, it seems, be animals. All right, we have to be some sort of thing that is capable of being restored to being after being burnt to ashes. All right, so here's the religious objection to our being animals. You will continue existing after the animal is destroyed, or at least you could continue existing if that were to happen, okay? It follows that you are not an animal, right? You could outlive the animal. A thing cannot outlive itself. So you are something other than an animal. All right? That's one reason to think that we're not animals, okay? So here is a second reason. This is a completely secular and non-religious reason. This is the reason that most of my colleagues in philosophy think that we're not animals. All right? So this is another thought experiment. This one involves surgery. Now, I'm sorry to have to use a thought experiment. I really wanted to do a live demonstration, but the University Ethics Committee churlishly told me that I couldn't, wasn't allowed to. So I want you to imagine a brain transplant. All right, now to help you to imagine it, I've got some very nice scientific illustrations. All right, so that's you, and that's your brain, and that's me on the right. And well, so we take your brain out of your head. What happens? Well, you lose a vital organ. Okay, you become completely unconscious. You lose all of your memories, and so on. You may remain alive, perhaps, but you'll be seriously disabled All right, you'll be a sort of vegetable. What about me? Well, of course, I will get your brain. My own brain has to go into the bin somewhere, I suppose. I haven't drawn that in. Now, of course, this operation will give me all of your memories of your past. So I'll be able to remember not my past, but your past. Okay, and there'll be other side effects of this operation, right? So, for example, I will be convinced that I live in your house, and that I'm married to your spouse, and that I'm the father of your children, and so on, or perhaps the mother, as the case may be, and so it goes, right? So I'm going to wake up from this operation very badly confused, or very badly misinformed, I guess. I'll be completely and systematically mistaken about who I am, how I fit into the world, and what my past was, and so on and so forth. Okay, I'll just, you may be able to cure my brain tumor in this way, but it will have very severe side effects. Right, now you might be thinking at this point that I've described the operation in the wrong terms. You might think, well, maybe the operation doesn't give me a new brain, but really it gives you a new body, right? So that chap at the lower right is not me, you might think, or at least not obviously me, but you might think he's actually you. What the operation does is it cuts away your legs and your arms and your torso and everything but your brain, pares you down to that small blue object, and then you're moved across the room and put into my head and given new parts to replace the ones that you lost. Okay, so that the person who wakes up after the operation is exactly who he thinks he is. He's not Olson, he is you, the brain donor. Okay, that might sound like a more intuitive description of the brain transplant scenario. Okay, of course, in that case, that person, what should we call it? The brainless vegetable on the lower left cannot be you as well. That must be, well, who knows what or who that is or where it came from. That's a further detail to be tied up later on. Now, if this description is right, if you would go with your transplanted brain, then it follows from this that you are not an animal. Why is that? Well, think about what happens to the animal that donates the brain, right? What happens to an animal when its brain is removed from its head? Does the animal get pared down to a 2.5-pound squishy pinkish gray organ? Well, it doesn't seem so. It seems that the organism simply loses an organ. It stays behind and gets an empty head, right? So this thing with the question marks is the animal, right? The operation has moved apart an organ from one living organism to another one, much as a liver or a kidney transplant would do, or a cornea transplant, or any of the familiar, actual, real-life transplant operations that take place in hospitals. Okay, so you and the animal could come apart. You could go your separate ways, all right? But of course, a thing in itself cannot come apart, right? You can't come apart from yourself. Okay, so if you could leave your animal behind, then you and that animal must be different things, right? So the operation does not move any animal from your head to my head. If it does move you, then you're not an animal. Okay? So here's the secular objection to our being animals. You would go with your transplanted brain. No animal would go with its transplanted brain. It would only lose an organ, right? And even if it follows that you are not an animal. And this follows even though you're never actually going to have your brain transplanted into my head or anyone else's head, right? It's never going to happen. but it could happen. So you have you have a property that no animal has, namely the capacity to be pared down to a naked brain, right? You have the power to go with your transplanted brain. The animal has not got that power, right? So you and the animal must be something else. So, why do I think that I am an animal and that we are all animals, despite the reasons, which may not be very impressive, that I've given to the contrary? And this is for two reasons. First, I think it's the best answer available to the question. The question is, what sort of things are we? All right? And it's not much good saying, well, I don't like your answer to that question because of these reasons, unless you've got some other alternative answer that you can propose. Okay, so if we're not animals, we have to be something else. And it's not very clear what that something else could be if we've ruled out Plato's answer that we are immaterial souls of some sort. Right? So if we're not animals, what else could we be? That's a very hard question to answer. And it's not a question that I think there's any very good answer to. Here's a second reason, which is more surprising and less obvious, actually. If we are not animals, it follows more or less inevitably that it's impossible for any animal to think or be conscious. Okay, now this is controversial, and this is the last hard point that I'm going to make. All right, why is this? Suppose, for the sake of argument, suppose an animal could think or be conscious. Suppose it were possible, at least. All right, then surely, if an animal could be conscious and think, then a normal, healthy, adult human animal could think or be conscious. Okay, so this animal and that animal would now be thinking and would now be conscious. Okay, but if you were not an animal but something else, then there would be two thinking conscious beings sitting there. This is a point that, again, is difficult to illustrate, but this is the best I could do. Okay, so there's, we're supposing, right, a thinking conscious organism, okay, but people are not organisms, so there's also a thinking conscious person, all right? And they're both thinking, presumably, the very same thought, since they've got the same brain, and they're completely indistinguishable physically and neurologically, and so on. Now, I think this is an absurd situation, to say that there are two thinking beings there, the person and the animal, which is not a person for some reason, one of which could move to a different head and the other one couldn't. How could you ever know which one you were? The animal would think that it was a person and not an animal, and that it would go with its transplanted brain. It would be mistaken. For all you could ever know, you might be mistaken in that way. So even if you were not an animal, you could never know that you weren't, it seems.